our next speaker, which is Clodagh Barry, to open your screen, Clodagh, and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about eco-clusters, clusters, ecosystems, and maybe also respond a little bit to what you've heard today in terms of our, let's say, aspirations in Udaross and Park Namara to try and strengthen this idea of a marine cluster of the people on the line today. So, Clodagh, over to you. Thanks. Clodagh was on the screen until just 1 minute ago. You're back. Okay, Clodagh, over to you.
Thank you.
Great, where we go?
Is that good?
Yep.
Wonderful view. Okay, perfect. Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody. I'm transmitting here from a throne. To an áthas orm a bheith an seo inniu gur amagat to the team at Udaross na Gaeltachta for this opportunity, and also congratulations to the team at Udaross na Gaeltachta for the depth and breadth of presentations and innovations that we've seen here today.
Clodagh, you might pitch your voice a little bit higher to get into the microphone. It's a little faint. Thanks.
Okay.
Great.
So today I'm going to shine a light on the world of cluster and cluster development. What I'm going to present here today is my own experience of cluster development, along with observations and learnings from engagement with the cluster community. And as we move through the slides today, please put any thoughts, comments, reflections in the chat function. Today is about a dialogue. We need to go on this journey together. I was grateful to hear David mention the word trust, because clusters are all about building trust, social capital, and the flow of information, tacit information flow. So if we ask ourselves, I'm sure everybody here today may have an opinion, what is a cluster? Today I'm sharing 3 definitions from experienced practitioners around the world. So an early definition here is from Michael Porter. Clusters focus on business growth and regional competitiveness, and they are from geographical concentrations. Another definition here is from Ifor Fawkes-Williams, where he highlights that clusters are an umbrella term. They can mean different things to different people. It depends on where you are with the cluster development journey. And this definition highlights that clusters are industry-led, but inclusive of other key actors, governments, knowledge institutions, and communities. And if we look to Nicola Watts, another cluster practitioner, clusters are an industry-led collaborative network which works together to tackle opportunities and challenges too big for one single business or organization to tackle on its own. So why are clusters important? Clusters emerge from an industry-led shared learning platform. They naturally emerge where businesses work together to tackle common problems or collective opportunities. Clusters are important because they are the networks and connections that unleash innovation. Clusters provide the glue in terms of innovation ecosystems. They bring together all of the resources and infrastructure necessary for innovation. And we now know that innovation is central to recovery, to business growth, sustainability, our national recovery plans, our region's smart specialization, and for our industry transition that we're moving through at this time. It is important that we understand and analyze the strengths and weaknesses of our own innovation ecosystem. And clusters can play a pivotal role in the circular economies, in the shocks that we are moving through, COVID-19, Brexit, severe weather. Clusters are rising to the challenge and providing a positive way forward. We can see in the previous slide that in terms of the Global Innovation Index 2020 that Ireland performs very well. We are ranked 15th globally. Where we now look to where we are in the top 100 cluster rankings, we don't appear at all. So really, does this matter? So globally, we know that clusters are good for businesses and they're good for regional economies. The focus for clusters in Ireland is increasing just now. We have support from Enterprise Ireland with the RTCF. We have IDA involved with the FinTech and cyber clusters. We have Udaross na Gaeltachta with the marine cluster, with the Western Development Commission with the Blue Circle Economy cluster, We have local governments who are delivering on an ingenuity engineering cluster. We have the Department in Dublin of Climate who is delivering on the geosciences cluster. We have Intertrade Ireland, who is an advocate for clusters, and Invest Northern Ireland, who have set up many clusters in Northern Ireland. We also have examples of marine, ocean, and blue clustering initiatives that are happening around the world just now. An example here is Iceland's Ocean Cluster, Canada's Ocean Supercluster, based in Nova Scotia, which has had over 150 million of public funding over 5 years. We have Bodo, Norway, which is the salmon farming capital of the world. And one of their projects is getting school kids excited about careers in aquaculture. Clusters are good not only for businesses and regional economies, but also for creating shared value. Clusters provide good business outcomes, good social outcomes, and good environmental outcomes. Each cluster needs to define its value proposition and what it stands for. So in order to build on the great work already underway with Údarás na Gaeltachta and Páirc na Máire, can we reflect individually here today for a moment on the broad purpose of the Páirc na Máire cluster? So what does that mean to you? Where we connect, discuss, and agree on the cluster's broad purpose, we then need a partnership between aligned public agencies and a co-opetition culture amongst the companies. Where we look at the crowded space of innovation ecosystems, clusters are operating in an incredibly busy and crowded space. We can see how many organizations are involved in supporting businesses, financial institutions, investors. Do we need to consider how well is our innovation ecosystem functioning? Are there gaps in this? Do we need to support more connectivity across these actors? Do we have duplication? Is there reinvention of the wheel taking place? Is there wasted energy and opportunities lost that could otherwise maximize the impact and join the dots in a better way? So in looking where we are today, I've put up a strategy tool. Were we to work together just now and build on all of these people attending today, could we work on shaping the Údarás Marine Cluster strategy for 2030? Could everybody attending here today take 2 minutes to reflect on the Marine Cluster strategy? And I'm asking you, what is your vision for this? And can you please share your chat share your responses in the chat function? Okay. So as we would normally work through the last piece together, we can then move on to alignment of that vision. Who needs to be included? Who are the members that need to be active? Who needs to be brought in and agree to push forward on this cluster strategy? And if we then look to the leadership, what leadership is needed to deliver this? Clusters are advocates for collective leadership. Clusters need to deliver on shared value for all of the actors involved. So we need more connectivity across our clusters in order to better support cluster capability development. There is little room for the heroic individual leadership styles in clusters. There's a real need to focus on the ecosystem and to move away from the ecosystem. And collective leadership can give us a shared and unified sense of purpose. And this is where we would focus on what is our ambition within the vision that we've set out in the earlier contributions on the marine cluster for 2030. I wanted to share with the group here today that we are running a cluster capability program this October with IFR Fox Williams. This is about trust, social capital, and building tacit information flows. We need to build our understanding on what we have to do and how we are going to work together to do that. We need to build teamwork in our corner of Ireland and understand where this fits into the overall strategy. And we need to look at clusters as regional wealth creators. So in each of the webinars, we will move through the what and the why of cluster development, the how of cluster development, the practical steps, for example, in building a cross-agency cluster ignition team. We need to explore our cluster engagement. What is our region's smart specialisation? How are we at innovation diffusion? Where are we at networking and at internationalisation? So the Cluster Centre is working with clusters and policymakers across Ireland to build an overarching network. We are collectively gathering and strengthening the cluster ecosystem. And I wanted to share with you today, a bit like Dave's 7 principles, we have 7 principles that outline a successful cluster. These are the 7 C's. 1 is co-location. A cluster has to be proximate. We can cross corridors, we can cross streets and waterways. There needs to be shared interest, shared cultures, and shared history. There needs to be a concentration of human and social capital. And this also supports regional place-based competitiveness. There needs to be collaboration, cluster businesses and other stakeholders who are willing to work together and solve shared problems. At times, there will be competitive tensions that needs to be managed and navigated through. And it is quite easy to say, but how really effective are we at collaborating? There needs to be co-innovation. This is about participation and diversity, inclusion and innovation diffusion. There has to be a way to allow different ways of innovating to come through the system. Connectivity, we have to build our connectivity. This could be market access, shared relationships around the supply chain. These connections can foster national relationships and often transfer internationally and cross borders. We need to have enhance our shared capability and take them to new levels. Clusters need to communicate. They need to communicate the cluster stories around innovation, collaboration, small wins, big wins, and failures. Clusters can change the narrative around what is possible. And we need to have a commitment to act. We need leadership to nudge the context to support deeper and transformational change. There needs to be meaningful activity happening on the ground. We need to get the balance right and to test and explore small-scale activities. Clusters are an interesting and dynamic mix of trust and social capital and tacit information flow. This, combined with the agility to act and pivot, underpins successful clusters. As we're here today, we are starting to plug the gaps. We're building these relationships. It's not easy to pin down, and we need to respond to our own context. Cluster thinking and cluster development, it's an ongoing journey. Thanks for allowing me to share some of this journey, and I'm happy and looking forward to the discussion.
That's great. Thanks very much. Just as you were putting up that slide there, the one that's still on, which has some lovely graphics up on the whiteboard, we'll call it, a question came in, Clodagh, straight away, which you might address. And it was kind of a funny question in a way, but maybe inspired by that picture. What is the role of artists in developing clusters?
What is the role of art? I think that's a question. I think it's really important. I think that comes back to our narrative. It comes down to our future state. I think artists create the narrative, and they create the vision, Micheál, that we can engage and understand and buy into. They're the custodians of our language and of our culture, and they can bring us, they're our communicators, they can bring us on this journey, and they're our storytellers, often far more effective than we are ourselves. So they're critical. And just to say, I know the community has come up a few times here today, and we are all transitioning. So business is transitioning and the community is transitioning. But Micheál, there is a big push from the European Union with regards to the social economy and the role that has to play. So any cluster that is not bringing in the quadruple helix, which is the academics and the research and the public agencies, the businesses and the communities as part of that, it won't be fulfilling its mission in how it needs to survive. So whether that's the supply chain or the talent chain or the communications, I suppose we are part of that narrative. So as the Partner Mara cluster emerges and these initiatives, gain more shape and more traction, and we achieve the 200 jobs, that the challenge that Mark has set out this morning, we are part of that journey. And then are we getting behind that journey? And then what is the role of the artist in that journey?
Thanks very much. I'm not sure where the person who put that question is based, but from their time clock, they're at 8:59 in the morning, so they're 8 hours away somewhere in the world.
Yes.
So thank you, YPI, for that question. But definitely there is a role for artists, and I suppose more broadly, art as part of culture, and you're saying there about the social economy and social capital, that you would basically be saying we need to be very clear that this concept of clustering brings in community, brings in culture and so on. Is there any, from the work you've done so far, Claude, and I know you were with the Western Development Commission for a while,
Yes.
examples that you can point to regionally within Ireland where, you know, there's, let's say, some evidence or track record of a regional cluster that is sustainable at this stage?
Yeah, many of the clusters now are on the, when you say sustainable, so we have Geosciences Ireland, which was a policy-led cluster set up by the Department of the Climate and the Department of Foreign Affairs, which is on the East Coast. And you'll find these examples on the website, Micheál. We have just recently launched the FinTech cluster, which is in the Belfast crossing borders. So they're looking to connect the EU and UK FinTech, which is really important at the time of Brexit. We have IT Cork, we have cyber clusters. So we have many individual clusters with the IWFMN, the furniture cluster. We obviously have Park Namara here. We have the Western Development Commission cluster, which is around gathering the fishing nets. And we were speaking about this earlier, but there's a lot of the communities involved in gathering the fishing nets. And now, what is the public system and local governments doing with regards to the circular economy and repurposing them, and also around sustainable clothing. So there are conversations happening individually, and I think from Mark's discussion and all the contributors thus far, we can see that we have a need to gather these together into the ecosystem, and we need to map these, and we need to understand how we interact with each other, and then to what purpose and where are we going with this.
Okay, tell us maybe briefly about your own journey, if you wouldn't mind. You were saying that this is something that is a journey and that is not easy to pin down. Why are you interested in clusters?
Why am I interested in clusters? Because Micheál, I've had the privilege of working in both private and public sector, and I see that there's a lot of good energy, great intent, a lot of great innovation happening, and there can always be a little bit of frustration. And I can see that with very small tweaks, and whether that is around connectivity, mapping, understanding, bringing in communities, that we can actually perform in an accelerated way with very small tweaks to what we already have. We need to build our relationships, we need to open the communications, and I think that we can do a lot better for ourselves. We're a great nation, resilient, we're very small, we're always punching above our weight, we're well respected internationally. So I think we have an opportunity, and especially for the West Coast, I was delighted with the Marine Institute's real map of Ireland. So often when we're looking at policy and planning, we're doing this in a land-based view, whereas we're ignoring 2/3 of our economy, and 2/3 of our economy is in the sea. And before we get to a place of rural depopulation that other countries have had to reinvest and bring population back in, we have iterations. We need to make, actually we don't need to make the West of Ireland. It is attractive for young people, but what do we need to do to communicate that this is attracting talent? And I know Moira and the team has done great work on that. But talent will continue to keep the pipeline of innovation flowing, to keep the system stimulated, to keep our vision of what 2030 on the West Coast of Ireland needs to look like. And I think we need to take responsibility and join in that conversation and get behind the leadership and vision for that. We have one of the, it is a great geography to live in. We have all of the benefits. We need the broadband there. And once we join these dots, Micheál, I think we are away. And I think with the Ross McGael in their remit around the language. I think that very much it is shared understanding and that we have this common language. And clusters are a way to bring it in. So it's not about the science, and it's not about the academic piece, and it's not about the growth piece. It's what is our shared challenge, and what is our collective opportunity, and how do we all contribute and get involved with that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. There's a few comments coming in on the Q&A, which are not exactly questions, but you might respond to them. One is, Anne Ruddy, clusters need to adopt an attitude of inclusivity and not exclusivity. So that's, I think, perhaps something, because you had already mentioned about building trust earlier on. Just responding to what you've heard here today and what you know, the little bit that you know probably about Park Tomorrow and what we're doing here, how would you rate us on this thing of inclusivity versus exclusivity, and what advice would you have?
Yeah, Michal, I wouldn't be so bold as to rate you, Michal, but yeah.
Give a go. You're welcome.
I think we all can have a more joined up approach. Yeah. And I think that we need to set out that 2030 vision. We need to take a point in the future, and then we need to individually come to the table and say, what is our responsibility in that? So whether that is the community or the business community or the academic or GRETB or the islands, we need to deliver on that together. I think that we are open enough and we're big enough and responsible enough for ourselves that we need to accept the responsibility of what we've been tasked with. And if we are invested in the future of the west of Ireland and our marine future, then we can have those conversations. And there's a lot to be said when I say that we need to move out of our ecosystem. We need to move into the ecosystem. So what we're pointing towards and working towards is 2030. And I think that's, I think the leadership, and when I listed all the leaderships there, you know, there is community leadership, there is business leadership, there is authentic, there's quiet leadership, and we need all of these represented to achieve and get behind where we need to go.
Yeah. Okay, just one other question that has come in, and then I'll make a comment myself as well. The question was from Margaret Ray, who I believe is involved in marine research with the Marine Institute, and thanks, Margaret, for that. And she was, I think, referring back to something you said about Canada, about a supercluster. So what is a supercluster? But just while you're thinking about that, you mentioned at the beginning about clusters can help us as individual companies to deal with resilience and shocks. And,
yeah.
I was on a phone webinar on Monday this week with some people, and it was again a Know the Ross project. And a guy called Michael Malloy, who was the chair of the Irish Aquaculture Farmers Association, he talked about the 3 shocks that are affecting him. He's a mussel farmer in County Mayo and Clodagh, a very experienced fellow. And he said, we're looking at the moment, he said, at the effects of COVID, first of all. Secondly, the shock of Brexit, which is coming down very fast, 7,000 trucks. And thirdly, then just the obstacle or the logjam of government regulation and licensing altogether. And those 3 collectively have the capacity, I would say, to stymie or sink quite a lot of potential investment or, you know, current investment. So would you maybe respond on that? In what way such the cluster that we have, that we're trying to develop, help us to deal with those shocks? And maybe briefly the thing about superclusters. Thanks.
Thanks. And Michal, I think that we need a platform to have those conversations. So were we to work with, is it Michael and Mayo?
Michael Malloy, yeah.
Yeah. So were we to work with Michael and we set out, well, what is your supply chain? Who are your actors? Where are your relationships with? Where are the problems in the value chain? So we need to sit down and map out the supply chain and the value chains, and where are the connections, and what can we do to pivot and be agile? And I think that is really the conversations that clusters have and that can surface and bring to the fore. Yeah. So I've seen it very much in the furniture industry, that how the supply chain reacts, and you know, we can share machinery, can we share workforce? We've got jobs on this week. So how do we work with each other to get over these pieces? And then what will you contribute to the long-term future of where we have to go with this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Superclusters, last question briefly, and then we'll move to main.
So, so we all have different stages of cluster development. So you have emergent clusters, with mature clusters, and then mature clusters can go on and they can either metamorphosize, they can disappear, or they can become a supercluster. Yeah.
Okay, great. We're
on our way to a supercluster.
Well, hopefully. So thanks very much, Clodagh. That was really good. And we hope to continue to dialogue with you and to maybe tap into, we'll say, some of the theory and the research behind it. And I'm hoping that a few people on this call today may take part in that course that you mentioned as well.